if we diagnose ourselves as an anxious attachment style, the danger of a diagnosis is that it becomes an excuse for whatever we do. There are 4 different attachment styles: anxious, secure, avoidant, and anxious avoidant. Audrey, maybe you can speak to the anxious attachment style and maybe the anxious avoidant.
I'm not sure about you guys, but I first heard about attachment styles when I read the book Attached, which talked about attachment theory. So I suppose people who have anxious attachment are always looking for ways the relationship's going to fall apart. A lot of it is tied into feeling sort of fears of abandonment and fears of rejection. You can get very, very reactive in arguments because you get very flared up within those kinds of ways. But also, I think even when the relationship is going well, you're still looking for ways that it could fall apart, even in the best moments.
What for you is the worst part about having that anxious attached style, that anxious style?
Well, I've got much better over time with it. I definitely related to it more a few years ago. But I think the hardest part is not being able to enjoy it, not being able to just feel safe.
Not being able to enjoy the thing you have.
Correct, yeah, not being able to just enjoy the relationship. And it can be the most, beautiful or non-confrontational, non-argumentative relationship, yet you still somehow have this underlying feeling of everything's going to go wrong and everything's going to go to shit. So I think that's probably the hardest thing. And I think accepting that you are safe is something I've personally had to do a lot of work on, as you know. And I think that once you can do that, you do just sort of find a new peace in your relationship, and that's really, really lovely. But that, I think until you can accept the fact that no one really ever is safe, truly, right? We can all, at any given moment, we can all get hurt. Something can go wrong. People can leave. People can die. And I think if you spend your whole time living there, it just destroys the experience.
Stephen, as someone who perhaps relates to the opposite end of the spectrum, or not, you tell me, is it fair to say you are on the avoidant side of attachment styles?
Slightly, yeah. I probably lean, I don't relate so much to the anxious attachment one, the avoidant one more so. There is one that's kind of a bit of both. It's called disorganized, and there could be bits of that because in some ways I do crave intimacy, or I don't know if crave intimacy is the word, but I can really feel a sense of like, I don't know, maybe anyone does. If you're alone for a long time, you can feel a sense of like, oh, I don't want to be abandoned. Like I want to, being a bit feared of being abandoned because I enjoy my own company a lot. I do have a natural sort of loner tendency. I have historically gotten scared of being trapped in relationships and feeling like relationships are a large demand on my time and energy. And
so that's the avoidant part of you.
Yeah, and perhaps feeling resentful at times when I feel I have to do too many things for the relationship, or I'm very scared of someone becoming emotionally dependent on me for their needs. And I think that's the crux of it. That's the grand fear, is this person will now depend on me for their happiness. And that's a scary thought, I suppose, for someone with that tendency.
What I want to know is which one you guys relate to, Matthew and Jameson. I bet Jameson's secure. Can just see it. Securely attached. Is that the one you most relate to?
Yeah, actually, I do relate to being securely attached. But I have to say, I mean, I'm sure we'll probably get into this because going off of the book Attached, remember when I read it, I thought it was a very solid theory and it felt very like, this is pretty insightful about people's different experiences of relationships. But that book seemed to think that it was you were pretty much just cut from that cloth. Like you were in one of these categories. And I think it's easy for me to relate to being secure now because I've been in a long-term relationship that's just based off loyalty and trust, and I'm just very secure there. But I can just imagine that if things went a different way, I'm definitely wired for all kinds of, there's just definitely a spectrum.
That point, Jameson, about it potentially being fluid is interesting, because I think the risk of a book like this is people can get in sort of constant diagnosis mode where you explain everyone's behavior as a function of attachment styles. And, the truth is some people, maybe they're avoidant, but there's also people who are just selfish assholes and don't want to compromise on anything. And they don't need to be diagnosed as, if they're avoidant and I just figure out and understand that. Or there's people who are, who are really anxious to an extent where it's toxic and they're toxically needy. And it's like, you can't just get off the hook by it being, well, I'm an anxious type. But you're like, some forms of anxiousness are genuinely like toxic. Like they are someone who immediately smothers someone and completely sort of almost uses them as just kind of to get all their emotional needs met and to feel like I'm now subsuming my life into yours. And these are not just healthy tendencies, right? So there can be a way people maybe use it as a way to kind of explain those parts of themselves a bit too much or overdiagnose.
Look, the catharsis of a diagnosis of any kind is that you have a diagnosis. I mean, anyone who's ever had any kind of illness or pain knows that having something diagnosed, emotional or physical, can be very cathartic. I now know why I am the way I am. I have some kind of closure on myself. The danger of a diagnosis is that it becomes an excuse for whatever we do. And if we diagnose ourselves as an anxious attachment style, and then anything we do that is anxious in our behavior, any way we treat someone, any way we unnecessarily accuse someone or act out, we say, well, I can't help it. I have this anxious attachment style. That becomes a very dangerous thing. I think that we have to separate what our tendency may be from what behavior we are going to choose to model, because that's always a choice. What we decide to do is a choice. I could be anxious, but say, I'm gonna do better than this feeling I have right now. I feel it, but I also know what my nature is. I know that my nature is to be overly afraid of losing someone, to believe that I'm not going to be okay if I lose someone, and then to overcompensate for any time I think I've made a mistake, to get overly guilty anytime I do something that I'm not proud of, to create stories anytime someone doesn't text me enough or leaves me alone for 5 minutes, to imagine kind of things in the rustling in the bush is a lion when it's nothing, it's the wind. I know that's my nature, so I'm going to do better than that nature in the way that I behave. That is a choice. You, Stephen, could know that it's kind of there's a part of you that trends towards feeling suffocated or feeling like you're afraid of becoming responsible for someone's needs and emotional well-being, and catch yourself and go, I know that's where my mind goes naturally. It doesn't need any help to go there. That is where my mind goes. But I also know that about myself. And so and given that I know that about myself, I know that I have a tendency to, overly keep the people at arm's length instead of just setting healthy boundaries or even just communicating about the fact that I really like having some alone time in my week or my day, or I really like being able to go to a quiet corner and just kind of read and do my thing. I really think that what can be useful about these kinds of heuristics is that the ability to know which way the wind naturally blows for us doesn't become an excuse for all of our behavior. Instead, it becomes a recipe for self-awareness so that we can mitigate our own behavior.